Good morning. Thank you for joining us for this presentation on International Entrepreneur Parole. This webinar is being recorded and the recording link will be emailed to all attendees. This webinar is provided as an educational service by Alcorn Immigration Law. The information discussed is an overview only and should not be construed as legal advice or advice to take any specific action. Please be sure to consult a knowledgeable professional with assistance with your particular legal issue. Lastly, please submit any questions you may have using the Q&A function. The questions do get shared publicly, so please do not share any sensitive or personal information. There is an option to submit your questions anonymously. We will try to get to as many questions as time permits. And it is now my pleasure to introduce to you our founding attorney, Sophie Alcorn.
Okay, thank you so much, Edith. I appreciate it. Hi, everybody, and welcome to this webinar from Alcorn Immigration Law. We are going to be talking about International Entrepreneur Parole. Very, very excited about this new program. And so the focus of today's webinar will be all sorts of things that international startup founders need to know and understand to start preparing for your journey to the United States. And some of you are in the United States already, working at other companies or on other immigration statuses, maybe you're students, and some of you are in other countries. So thank you for joining us from other time zones. We appreciate it. And we'll be talking about how international parole can work for you, regardless of what country you were born in and regardless of what country you are in today. So we have lots to cover. The plan is I'll introduce myself for a little bit, then we'll talk about a quick overview of immigration if you're new to our webinars. Then we'll go into a lot of nuts and bolts on international entrepreneur parole and how it works. And then if it's not right for you, I'll be concluding with some visa alternatives that you can consider as well. And then we'll have time for Q&A at the end. So as we go through, you're welcome to add your questions, as Edith mentioned, to the question and answer panel from Zoom. I prefer that to the chat window. It's a little bit easier for me to manage the questions and make sure that I've answered all of them. Okay, so let's dive in. So just a little bit about Alcorn Immigration Law, which is the firm that I started. We're here in Silicon Valley. Our mission is to overcome borders, expand opportunity, and connect the world by practicing compassionate, cutting edge, and rigorous immigration law in service of the betterment of humanity. So I took a walk in my neighborhood yesterday, and there was a sign for some home builders, and they said something like, "We remember that you're the ones living in your home." And I was thinking about, for Alcorn Immigration Law, you know, we remember that immigration is actually about your life, and we remember that immigration is actually about your company. So we get that it's personal, and we've got you covered. And part of the reason that I understand that is because my mom is an immigrant from Germany and my dad was an immigration lawyer. And when I grew up in Southern California, my dad regaled us with the wonderful stories of the people from around the world who he got to help, and we got to meet them, and we would have house guests and go for dinner at other people's houses. And it was, you know, totally normal for my family that we had friends from Vietnam and India and Australia and Turkey and South Africa. So it was very global, and that's where I feel at home. Other immigration things I've done, if you're new to the Alcorn universe of immigration, webinars, blogs, podcasts, TechCrunch articles, is yes, we do have it's all on our website. So we have lots of materials for you if you're interested in more of the specifics that we cover. I am a contributor to TechCrunch, the tech online newspaper. So I have a weekly advice column called Dear Sophie, which is published every Wednesday. and also a podcast called Immigration Law for Tech Startups, which is currently trending on the entrepreneur leadership boards in 2 countries that start with the letter E. So I don't know if any of you are from these countries, but if you are, welcome. The 2 countries are Estonia and Egypt. So it's been exciting for the podcast there. And our firm is growing. We love welcoming new team members who are from different parts of the world and who are children of immigrants and people married to immigrants, people for whom immigration is very personal. So we love supporting our clients. And because of our compassion and communication and more boutique approach, perhaps, as opposed to a volume-based approach, we've been very successful, even with the immigration challenges of the Trump era, winning almost all of our cases despite national approval averages drastically declining over the last few years. So we're very, very proud of that. And we do have a vast global network. I recently became a mentor at 500 startups. And so, you know, we're happy to leverage this network for the benefit of our clients. All right. Okay. So immigration context overview. So many of you have been to my webinars before, so this part will be a little bit of a recap, but I think it's important to lay the groundwork. And I do see that there's a question in the chat window, so I would just ask that you move your question to the question and answer panel, please, because that will help me answer it before the end of the webinar and make sure I can stay organized about that. So thank you so much. So most people who come to the United States or want to come to the United States to form a business typically come on a visa. You don't have to, but for many startups, it's more urgent to not have to wait to complete the green card process, which can often take several years. So many startup founders do typically come to the United States on a visa first, an F1 for students, a J1 for exchange visitors, an H1B if you're working at a tech company, perhaps an O1 if you're already established in your field and working for a company. So there's lots of ways to end up in the United States. But international entrepreneur parole is not one of the options you see on the screen. And I'll go into it a little bit in just a minute, more about what it is. But we also have a lot of students who have their own more detailed journey in the United States. There's about 1 million international students who are present at any given time. And the student immigration journey involves some stops along the way, including the possibility of curricular practical training, to have either paid or unpaid work during your studies as an internship or a summer job, for example. Then graduates of all bachelor's, master's, or doctoral level programs get at least 1 year of optional practical training after they graduate. And then there's an additional 2-year extension for people with science, technology, and engineering and mathematics backgrounds. So that's called 2-year STEM OPT. And then additionally, many individuals who are in the US as students hope to get accepted in the H-1B lottery, and then they hope that their employers will file green card petitions for them so that they can one day have their turn in line and get a green card and then become citizens later. So if you're a student, international entrepreneur parole is probably going to be the right pathway for you, somewhere in the middle. So you might end up going from OPT to international entrepreneur parole, or perhaps leaving STEM OPT early to get it, or maybe doing it instead of getting an H-1B. Or for some individuals who are already working at companies, I'll talk about this more, but for various reasons, you might actually decide to leave your H-1B and get international entrepreneur parole. For example, if you were born in India and you're waiting for your turn in line for a green card. So we can talk more about that as well. All right, so the new path with international entrepreneur parole is this. You could have IEP before you ever qualify for a visa, and you could have it before you ever get a green card. And you could go from international entrepreneur parole to a visa, or you could skip the visa and go directly to a green card. So it's not technically a visa, and I'll talk a little bit more about why, but for all intents and purposes, think of it as another tool in your toolbox. If you meet the qualifications, you'll be able to live and work legally in the United States for certain periods of time. And then, as always, you know, later, if you want to get a green card from international entrepreneur parole, the most common ways to do that would be through business or family, or by going through the green card lottery. All right, so now let's go into lots and lots of details about international entrepreneur parole. Okay, so this has a long, tumultuous history, but the bottom line, I think the basics that people need to know are that Obama created it, Trump tried to cancel it, and Biden just resurrected it. So it is now available. It was kind of on hold for the last several years. The government under Trump processed about 30 applications. One person got approved. And I had a feeling that it would be coming back. So we started accepting clients for this back in February, I believe. But fortunately in May, and that was before we knew if Biden was going to bring it back, because I was going to make the administration bring it back if they didn't act. But fortunately, on May 11th, so just about a month ago, the government announced that they are officially reopening the program. So it is totally usable. They've had lots of stakeholder meetings for lawyers and members of Congress to learn about the program. So they are really excited to get going with these petitions. So what is it? What is this new thing? Okay, you can live in the US and run your startup for 2.5 years. And then if you still qualify, you can get another 2.5-year extension. And if you're married, your spouse can come. If you have kids and they're under 21, they can come. And if your spouse wants to work, your spouse will be eligible for a work permit. So that in a nutshell is like the benefit. That's the purpose. So IEP is a way for you to initially be able to come live and work in the US and be the CEO of a tech company or any type of startup really for at least 2.5 years. And then during that time, you could either renew IEP or get a visa or get a green card maybe or leave. So lots and lots and lots of options. And I just want to reiterate, you can be born in any country, you can be a citizen of any country. There is no preference or discrimination for anybody based on country of birth or citizenship. There is also no cap or lottery. So the number of these is unlimited and it's based on the government's discretion. If you meet the requirements and they think that your company is going to help the US, then you can get approved. So that's already makes it better than other immigration visa types. And the government's purpose with this is that they actually recognize that startups and startup founders, entrepreneurs create innovation, they get patents, they conduct research, their companies have high growth, they create lots of jobs for Americans. And so the government has decided that they want to take an interest in supporting qualified entrepreneurs who are interested in growing their companies in the US if it would benefit the United States and create jobs here. So it's really wonderful because a lot of you have heard me and known me. I see some friendly names and faces in the attendee panel. So you know that I've been passionate about this for years. And I'm just so glad that the government's finally catching up. Some cool stats that will encourage you. Immigrants are more than 2 times as likely to start businesses in the United States as American-born citizens. 1 out of every for businesses and high-tech startups across America is founded or co-founded by an immigrant. Over half of the high-tech startups in the Valley were founded by immigrants. And another one I really like is that over half of the unicorns have at least one immigrant founder. So grit, resilience, determination, creativity, these are all common characteristics of the foreign founders that I have the privilege and honor to be able to support. Okay, so let's talk about what this is, because I alluded to the fact that parole is not a visa, and I don't think it's that big of a deal, but it does have some effects that you'll need to understand. So parole is not admission, it's not a visa, and it's not a green card. It's basically under the eyes of the law, like you're standing at the border and you have temporary permission to come pop into the country for a certain purpose. So you're allowed to come in for a certain amount of time and for a certain reason. And for international entrepreneur parole, the maximum authorized stay is up to 30 months. Each time you come into the country, you should be granted in for a 1-year period, and then you'll have to leave and re-enter. You cannot extend it in the United States, but there is that option to extend the overall validity period for another 2.5 years. And I'll talk later about what the requirements for that are. First, I want to talk about who qualifies. Sure, I have some water. All right. Okay, so here are the questions, and then I'll summarize the requirements. So first I ask people, how old is your startup? If your startup is a US company that's less than 5 years old, then you can keep going and go on to the next question. If your startup is not incorporated in the US yet, then you have to incorporate it here or create an LLC here. Most venture capital investors in Silicon Valley are looking to see that you have a Delaware C corporation, although the IEP does not require that. So theoretically, if you had, for example, a California LLC type of company, that could technically work too for immigration, but it might not be good for you if you want to fundraise in the future. Now, the next question that I ask people is, what percentage of the company do you own? You need to own at least 10% of the company to qualify for the initial grant of parole. So if you are an early stage employee and you have 5% equity, you would not qualify for international entrepreneur parole, and we would need to find another visa type for you. To qualify for IEP, you need to have at least 10% at the time of the first application. Okay. Now, next question is, what is your role in the company? And in order to qualify, you need to have a position where you have the authority to run and grow the company and where you're going to be involved in it. So I think that any C-suite role, so CXO role, those are the nicknames for it, but like CEO, CTO, COO, CMO, probably just put any letter in the middle and it makes sense to somebody. But those chief roles, those would definitely count. Maybe if you want to structure it differently and you have like a president or a vice president, those would probably count. So, you know, you need to have a leadership role in organizing the company. Now, IEP can work for multiple co-founders from the same company. You can have up to 3 people from one company get approved for IEP. So you could have 3 co-founders that each own 33% before you start raising money. But we'll also talk about how much money you need to raise. So you know, if you have 3 co-founders with equal percentages, maybe all 3 of you could come. If you have 4 international co-founders, well, only 3 of you can come, even if you each own at least 10% and are getting a C-suite title. So for the 4th person, we would have to figure out some other option, but maybe they're Canadian and they could get a TN, right? So there's always strategy for each company that's a little bit different based on your founder composition. And additionally, the government wants to make sure that you are going to be growing and creating jobs in the United States. So we want to be able to show in your accounting that your revenue is going to be increasing in the US company. And we want to show that you're actually going to be hiring US workers. That you're going to have jobs available to US workers in the United States where you would pay them as W-2 employees, ideally. Now, you can't predict who will apply, but we have to show that you'll be making jobs available for Americans. So here's a summary of the questions that we ask. And you need to be a yes to all of these in order to proceed. So if your company is already established in the US, if it is less than 5 years old, if you have at least 10% of the company, and if you are going to be a leader in the company, then we can move on to the next set of requirements. And it is this. So if you're yes to all of the above, then we need to know if in the last 18 months, you either raised money from American investors of $250K, or if in the last 18 months you got a US government grant of at least $100,000, or if the answer is sort of, not quite, almost, we're on our way, not yet, then we might still be able to get you approved if we can show other reliable and compelling evidence of your substantial potential for rapid growth and job creation. So let's talk about what some of that other evidence could look like. The government would want to see how many users do you have? How many customers do you have? How much revenue are you generating? Maybe how quickly you've grown that revenue. Have you gotten, maybe you didn't get 250K from qualified US investors, and I'll talk about who qualifies. So if you didn't, did you get a German government grant or a New Zealand government grant or something for your company? Or maybe you crowdfunded, so let's take a look at that. The government will also be interested in the social impact of your startup, whether the scope of the company or the product or the services or the jobs will be national in nature. They care if you're going to create a lot of jobs in a particular region in the United States. They also are interested in seeing if you're well qualified to lead the company. So do you have special academic degrees related to this field of expertise, or did you have success in prior startups that you already founded because you're a serial entrepreneur? So in those prior startups, did you get patents? What was your revenue? Did you create jobs? Other highlights about those companies. If you're in Y Combinator or 500 Startups or another prestigious accelerator or incubator, then that would be very beneficial. And it's like a free-for-all. So this depends on how good your lawyers are, right? Because we need to argue and show that whatever reliable and compelling evidence there is that your company will be responsible and be able to sustain rapid growth and job creation in the United States. Okay, so if you get IEP, there are certain things to remember. If something changes in your company, you have a duty to notify the government about it, and they can end your parole. So if your board fires you, if the company closes, if your ownership drops too low, any of these things, that automatically terminates your IEP. And if the government, for some reason, suspected you of not complying or committing fraud, or if there was a mistake, then they could like write a letter to you and give you notice that they're going to terminate it. So that's for the initial period. And briefly, the renewal process, if you want to stay longer than 2.5 years, you can seek an additional 2.5 years in the States, and there are different criteria. So instead, you either have to show one of the following: that you created at least 5 US jobs, you fundraised at least 500K, or your company hit 500K of revenue in a year with 20% annual growth. So those are the 3 main ways to do it. But if you don't meet those, don't despair. You still can possibly renew it if we can show other evidence of your company's growth. All right. So now I see that there's already a lot of questions, and I really appreciate them. And I do encourage you to put them into the question and answer panel as opposed to the chat window, so I can make sure to answer them. And before I dive into your questions, I'm also going to answer some of the frequently asked questions that we've been getting from our other webinars and our clients and potential new clients who we've been talking to. Okay, so what qualifies as government funding? It has to be from the US government, but it doesn't have to be federal. It could be a state, county, or local government, or federal government, like an SBIR grant for scientific research. Any of that would work at the 100K level. But let's say the government of Malaysia gave you a $250,000 grant. Would we ignore it? No. You may well be able to get approved based on that, just in the 3rd category of like other reliable and compelling evidence. So please tell us about that. It matters, but on its face, technically you're supposed to have a US government grant, but you don't actually have to. Okay, this is an important one. What is a qualified investment? All right, so a qualified investment has to be a good faith investment. It can't come from your mom, dad, brother, sister, spouse. And it has to be at least, as I said, $250,000. The investor has to be American or have a green card. And then there are some additional requirements about their past history of investing. But once again, remember, if you don't meet those for some reason, but you still raised, you know, X $100,000, I think we can still use it. It's not a big deal. We just have to put it forward differently. Do the VCs, oh, this is a very detailed question. Do the limited partners of the venture capital funds whose money is being invested into your company, do those people also have to be American? No. It's mostly about where the fund is created and where the fund is managed from that the government is looking for here. So that is a really good thing. Here's another question. How do you actually get to the United States with parole? So if you're in your home country, you do need to make an appointment at the embassy. We help you do this. It's not a visa interview like with a DS-160 if you ever applied for a visa in the US before. You're getting a different thing. You're getting an appointment for something called a boarding foil, which also kind of looks like a visa. It's placed in your passport and it also allows you to enter the United States, but you're asking for an appointment for that. Canadians don't need it. Canadians can show their paperwork at the border and drive in or get on an airplane without a boarding foil and come to the United States. And some of the things that we'll be testing very soon with our initial group of clients is, can they take their approvals to Mexico? So for example, if you're an Indian citizen in India and you can't get an appointment because the consulates are closed down, but you have permission to go to Mexico, could you go to Mexico with your approved parole paperwork and drive across the border into Tijuana? I think the answer is yes, but we need our first brave soul to test that out for us soon. And of course, we'll be sharing the results of that in our newsletter and in future webinars, so you can stay tuned. How much work does it take to prepare the application? So for an O1 visa, which is kind of like the most intense visa, we ask that our clients give us all of their documents in 6 weeks. For this, and for an H-1B, we ask that they give us everything in 3 weeks. For this, we ask that our clients give us everything in 4 weeks. So sort of a middle amount of work, but I think it's easier for our clients because the letters of recommendation that would be required for an O1 are not necessary here. So that will save our clients quite a bit of time. There's no deadline. This is ongoing. This is available and you can do it anytime, and it doesn't have an expiration date either. Okay, here's another common question we were getting, which is, how do you change from international entrepreneur parole to another visa or green card status later? We got clarification yesterday from USCIS, which changes something I said in my prior IEP webinar. So if you're listening today and this is important to you, please know that my guidance has changed because we have new information. You are not able to do a change of status from international entrepreneur parole to something like an O1A or H-1B or F1 inside the United States. And you are not able to adjust your status to a green card in the United States on that trip. Can you still get an O1 petition approved? Absolutely. Can you still get an O1 visa? Yes. The only difference is that we would do it through the consular processing mechanism by requesting a visa interview for you outside of the United States, probably at your home country, in order to get the visa and then re-enter the United States. And likewise with a green card, we would request an immigrant visa through the consulate. So it can be done. We can set up the timing to match the end of your international entrepreneur parole period. But just keep in mind that there will be travel necessary throughout the process. How does it compare to an O1 and an H-1B? So I mentioned a little bit about this already. An O1 does require a lot of recommendation letters that are long and detailed. It does not allow self-petitioning, and for international entrepreneur parole, you do self-petition. It's not your company that petitions for you, so you can do it independently, unlike the O1 where you need a petitioner or an agent to file the paperwork for you. Like an O1, there is no minimum wage for the employee, but there is a household minimum wage, which is different from any other working visa. Your household has to show that it will maintain at least an income level that is at least equivalent to 400% of the poverty guidelines for a family unit of your size. So it's going to be something around $100,000. So if you're single, that is going to need to be your salary. If you're married and your spouse is making 100K, then we'll calculate the numbers precisely. But if your spouse is making in that ballpark, you could potentially make minimum wage or even less at the startup. Now, differences compared to the H-1B. I mean, it's so much better than an H-1B in a lot of ways. There's no lottery. There is no ability to pay question. There is nothing about employer-employer relationship. There's nothing about decreasing your equity or having a board that can fire you. So I think it's way better than an H-1B. If somebody doesn't have an H-1B yet and they get international entrepreneur parole, I think that's fine. Maybe we can just launch them straight into a green card or an O1 if necessary. If somebody already has an H-1B, depending on how much time you have left, what country you were born in, and how much, where you are in the green card wait times, then you might still want to switch to IEP, like a founder I was talking to this week has been in the US for 11 years on H-1B, working for a big tech company. His perm and I-140 were already approved. He's awaiting his priority date to get a green card. He's eligible for AC-21 3-year extensions beyond the original 6-year period for H-1B. He can always go back to that if he needed to later. And if he goes to IEP, he can potentially buy back some equity from other stakeholders and actually be the CEO instead of being listed as simply a developer, which is the way that company was currently structured. So I think there's a lot of advantages to this program. Can an immigrant who overstayed a visa but otherwise qualifies for IEP, can you apply? So yes, you can apply, but the amount of time that you overstayed your prior visa matters. It should probably be less than 180 days, but then you could leave, you could like go to Mexico, and then you could come back in with this approval paperwork. The government did explicitly say that yesterday. Will applying for IEP affect your other parallel process of moving from OPT to STEM OPT? No, because IEP doesn't kick in when you're in the United States. And depending on your individual situation, I'd probably recommend somebody with this waits and gets their STEM OPT approved and they have their EAD card. We could get the International Entrepreneur Parole paperwork approved in parallel, and then you could leave and come back in on IEP and you would still have your F1 and your STEM EAD as backup. If your IEP gets denied, what are the consequences? Yeah, I think somebody was asking me like, what do they have to disclose on a future visa application, a DS-160, that they had a visa denial? IEP is very much not a visa. So as long as you're, not committing fraud or anything like that that would linger on your record, if it's just a simple denial for not qualifying, then I don't foresee it having any negative consequences to a future visa or green card application. Oh yeah, this was that question. Okay, so I see we have lots of questions and I want to spend most of my time answering them. So I'm going to breeze through this next section. If you're listening and you think that IEP does not apply to you, or you don't want a green card after 5 years, or you want another option after IEP, I'm just going to go through and give you a very brief overview of the other options that exist, so they're on your radar. And we have lots of podcasts and other materials about these if you're curious to learn more. There's cap-exempt H-1Bs, which you can get any time of year with no lottery by teaching university students for 5 hours a week. There are the O1s for extraordinary ability, as I talked about. If you're from Canada or Mexico, there's the TN. If you're Australian, there's the E3 work visa. If you want to do 5 years of research, you could get a J1. If you are personally investing into your company, you could get an E2. If it's not really a startup, but you're doing a lot of trade with your home country, you could get an E1 potentially. If you're from Chile or Singapore, you could get a working visa called an H1B1. So we have this chart and Edith will be sending it to everybody after the webinar, including a recording on YouTube of this webinar right now, and some other materials for your review. I am not going to go through these right now. Oh yeah, if you want to qualify for an O1 or self-petition a green card one day for extraordinary ability or being in the national interest, and you want to make sure you qualify, you can check out our online class called Extraordinary Ability Bootcamp. It's 15 video modules that I recorded that go into great detail about how to have a strong application for one of those, and Edith will be sending you that as well. And that relates to green cards. There are lots of pathways up the green card mountain. We're going to save that for another webinar. Okay, so for international entrepreneur parole, what would be the next steps? With any immigration option, you are going to want to take your time, your travel needs, your investor demands, your accelerator travel itinerary. You know, you need to take all of that into account with your attorney when coming up with the best strategy that's right for you, because it's different for everybody. There are going to be things to keep in mind, like you'll have to gather evidence and you might need translations of documents. For IEP, the education evaluation and the prevailing wage are not as significant as for some other visa types, but there will be government filing fees. There is an investment for immigration legal services, as is the standard practice, I believe, in this field. The investment for our legal services is done on a flat fee project basis to prepare and file the initial petition. And we do everything to help you put your best foot forward to minimize any chances of getting a request for evidence. So, you know, we work with you to put the whole package of various documents together to get through the biometrics appointments, the boarding foil, the practice interviews, making your travel arrangements and making sure that everything lines up. So we do all of that. We'll help your spouse get a work permit. And you all have our contact information, and you can follow us on social media too for updates about future webinars. So now what I'm going to do is start to go through all of your lovely questions in our remaining time. And I think we have time to do all of it. Excuse me. All right, so I'm going to go through the question and answer panel. Is the startup restricted to the tech industry? No. Can it be pretty much any type of business? Yes. The startup is in the process of being set up to be launched during the summer. Congratulations. Would that be acceptable for applying? Yes, assuming that at the time of application, you have an entity, a legal entity that exists. There's a bank account and you've raised at least $250K, or there's other similar evidence like what we discussed. Is there a way to get a green card while being on OPT? Yes, but that is not the purpose of this webinar, so I will leave it at that. And can you get an O visa after OPT? Yes, you can. Would the green card waiting list be, again, country of origin based or a common line? Thanks. Currently, the green card wait list is based on country of birth. It doesn't matter what your country of citizenship is. So if you are Indian or Chinese born and you move to Canada and now you're a Canadian citizen, you are still in the line for China or India, unless your spouse was born in a third country, and then you can get into line based on your spouse's country of birth. There's been a lot of proposals to change this, but nothing real has happened on it yet. But the good news for people this year is that 500,000 green cards were unused last year in 2020 due to COVID, and all of those by law get repurposed into the employment-based categories. So there's supposed to be rapid forward movement of the visa bulletin for folks born in India and China awaiting green cards in the coming months. So that's very exciting. What are some of the permanent immigration options for entrepreneurs? Those are green cards. So like the EB-5 green card for investors, the EB-1C green card for multinational managers and executives, the EB-1A green card for extraordinary ability, an EB-2 green card with the national interest waiver for perm. We have many podcast episodes about green cards for entrepreneurs. So I would encourage you to check that out. Our website has a link to the podcast, and Edith will send it to you as well. But the podcast is called Immigration Law for Tech Startups, and we have a new episode every week. If I am not a resident in my country of origin, am I still qualified? Yes, you are. While in international entrepreneur parole status, can I work remotely for another company in another country or remotely for a US company? I believe the answer is probably no. Probably no, but I haven't read anything about that yet. Here's another one. While in the US, as in this status of international entrepreneur parole, can I go out to another country and come back, or is it restricted in any way, like the number of times that this is allowed? I believe the answer is there are no restrictions. Your paperwork will be valid for 2.5 years. You can come in and out as many times as you would like, multiple entry, and each time you come in, you're allowed to stay for 1 year at a time. Are F1 students from India eligible? Yes. Does job creation have to be in my startup, or what if my startup itself is in a job creation market? I would love to talk to you about that because I think there's probably a way to qualify you. Next question. Are F1 students eligible to apply for IEP if they found their startup in the US? Yes. And what about F1 under their 3 years of OPT? Yes. I mean, you'll have to leave and come back in once it's approved, but you can apply. Which is a better path, the E2 or this entrepreneur parole program? Well, if you have $100,000 that you're planning to invest in your US company and you're not planning on raising venture capital, and you can actually spend that money before you go through the E2 visa application, and you're going to own at least 51% of your company, probably an E2 is better for you. But if any of that doesn't apply, like if your company isn't owned at least 51% by people of your home country, or if you don't have the personal capital to invest, or you're not sure how you would spend it yet, or you are raising money and your equity might dilute below 51%, all of these reasons are reasons why the entrepreneur parole program might be better for you. This is something that we could determine in a one-on-one consultation. It depends on your individual circumstances. Okay, next question. Thanks for all the great questions. If the green card is not guaranteed, why would someone want to go for the 2.5 years to the US and then you have to go back to your country of origin? Well, thank you for your opinion. Many people want to come here and try to make it work, and optimism and grit and determination and perseverance are definitely part of the Silicon Valley culture. Nothing in life is guaranteed, but you don't get anything if you don't try, and it is all possible. Next question. Can you hold a different visa while having IEP? Yeah, there could be another visa in your passport that could be valid, like a B1, B2, or an F1, but you'll pick one or another when you are coming into the United States. And can you apply for a different visa, such as an H-1B or an O, while being on IEP? Yes, you can apply. You will need to do consular processing, and so you'll have to leave, get a visa, and then come back in. Not sure what this is. Maybe it's a question. What are the top 5 criteria according to their importance for getting approved? In order to get approved, you need a US company. It has to be less than 5 years old. You have to own at least 10%. You have to be a leader in the company. And then I would say the strongest application would be if the company already raised $250,000 from a US serial investor. In the middle of IEP, if a company exits by selling or an IPO, does the IEP become invalid? Yeah, it would. So if you foresee, if you're in the due diligence process for being acquired, part of the strategy prior to completing those negotiations needs to be all right, do I have to leave the country? What's my backup plan? How am I going to get a visa? Ideally, we would work in parallel with the merger and acquisition process or IPO process to make sure that there's continuity for you and your residence. If the IEP does not give you a clear path for a green card and my venture is working according to plan, then you need to leave the US. The founder needs to liquidate the company and leave the US. Just because IEP does not have a mirror green card program doesn't mean you would need to leave. There are probably at least 2 green cards that somebody in this situation could qualify for. And with the right planning, we could make sure that the green card process could be taken care of before the end of IEP to make sure that you can have continuity in your residence. Do I need to incorporate in the US before applying for IEP? You need a company in the United States. If it's a corporation, yes, you need to incorporate. If it's an LLC, you need to create the LLC. Most startups are Delaware C corporations. Does Alcorn take equity as legal fees? Very rarely. This would be on a case-by-case basis. How is International Entrepreneur Parole compared to EB2? Well, the EB2 variant, called EB2 with a national interest waiver, is a green card that you can sponsor yourself for, showing that you have a master's degree or the equivalent and that your work is going to be in the national interest. Many startup founders who have created companies that are rapidly growing and hiring Americans get EB2 national interest waiver petitions approved as their pathway to a green card. So the programs are very different, but the same type of person might qualify for both. There is a question about removing the country limit. No, Congress has not acted on that. Am I returning to Draper University soon? I actually am. There are 2 talks being planned for July and August, so please stay tuned if you are in the Draper alumni community for that. And thank you for the other question. Can investment associates for a VC qualify? No, because VCs, private equity, hedge funds, those types of companies are not considered startups under this program. All right, and then a question about the investment, the government filing fees for the program. It depends on how many people are in your family and if your spouse needs a work permit. There is no premium processing. There is a basic International Entrepreneur Program filing fee of $1,200 plus biometrics are $85. And then separate from that would be the investment for our legal services, which I'm happy to discuss on a personal basis in our consultations, which you're welcome to schedule with us. To clarify, does IEP apply to non-tech startups too? Yes, you just have to show that you have the potential for rapid growth and job creation. So if you're not in the tech world, then we'd have to figure out the details of your company and how to get you to qualify. Oh my God, I went through 23 questions in 8 minutes or something. I'm gonna go through the chat window because I think some people may have put their questions in there. But I think that everybody listened to me and helped move the questions to the question and answer panel. So thank you for doing that. Yeah, I think we covered everything. So we're gonna wrap 4 minutes early. Oh, no, now people have more questions. No, okay, I'll answer these and then we'll wrap up. Is there a limit, a time limit in order to apply? No, this is going to be ongoing. I think as soon as you qualify or as soon as you think you're about to qualify, that's the time to initiate the conversation. And thank you so much. I can't wait to come back to Draper University. And I'm not planning on running for office yet, but they say that when the seat opens up in your district, that's when you should run. So we'll see what happens. So thank you so much, everybody, for being here today. I loved all your questions. Thank you for your attention. I hope this was valuable to you. And Edith will be following up by emailing you with all of the information to follow up. So thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Be well, do good work, and keep in touch. Bye.